Video game media. In many ways, it's almost kind of the holy grail of the show and film world. I'm sure right now, if you thought about it, you could think of a ton of movies and shows that were based off of or adaptations of certain video games, and I'm sure when you think about it, most of them that come to mind are not that good. There's a few standout exceptions here and there, but generally, most of Hollywood and mainstream media's attempts to adapt video games into some kind of live-action show or movie generally don't go too well. Well, that is except for one certain zombie show which came out at the start of 2023. Yeah, you guys should know exactly what I'm talking about. Today on FraudOnTheTele, we're talking about The Last of Us, the live-action series on HBO, and how potentially this could be one of the best video game adaptations I've ever seen. As always, if you enjoyed the video, learned something new, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. This video is going to be covering spoilers for The Last of Us show and The Last of Us video game in at least some kind of aspect, so do keep that in mind while we discuss episode 1 of The Last of Us. So The Last of Us, one of the most beloved video game franchises to come out in the last 10-ish years. The Last of Us is a zombie apocalypse story video game. The story follows one badass named Joel and his growing relationship with a young girl, a special girl named Ellie. The Last of Us, while being a unique take on kind of zombie apocalypse, as these zombies are based on a fungal parasite, this real-world fungus that has the ability to almost mind control and take over ant colonies in kind of a zombie-like fashion, creating a absolutely horrific zombie piece of media. But more importantly, I think with any horror and more specifically kind of a zombie apocalypse tale, the story of The Last of Us more broadly focuses on the human relationships and human elements of this zombie apocalypse. To, in my opinion, an absolute amazing result, especially when you consider that this story was originally developed for a video game, kind of at a time when video game storytelling was not nearly as professional and as well done as it is now over the last few years. So you can imagine the absolute uproar and hype train that was to be built whenever HBO announced that there would be a live-action The Last of Us TV series. And I gotta say, I don't want to get too overhyped about this show, but if we judge it just from the pilot, this show could be really something special. You see, in my opinion, one of the most important elements of The Last of Us is the opening scene, the opening intro sequences. In the video game, we are introduced to our main character, Joel, and his young daughter. Now, this is before this apocalypse, this zombie outbreak has started. The day begins on Joel's birthday, as Joel is a single parent father to his young daughter, and their relationship is absolutely adorable. The first few minutes in the game spend some time trying to establish this relationship between Joel and his daughter, and really to just get the viewer and the gamer to buy in to this relationship. And then things suddenly go south as the zombie apocalypse breaks out, ensuing for absolute pandemonium. These scenes in the video game are extremely intense, as it suddenly just jolts you out of your seat, as the mood suddenly shifts into high octane, high stress, high anxiety, as Joel and his daughter and his brother attempt to flee from their lives out of the ensuing destruction that is taking place in this city as the zombie apocalypse has begun. This whole series of scenes and sequences in the live-action HBO show was absolutely stunning, as in my opinion, in the video game, this is one of the most important aspects of the narrative of the story. It really sets the tone. It's super intense and ultimately filled with tragedy, as Joel would lose his daughter being shot by a soldier, and she would ultimately die from the bleeding and the gunshot wound. These events are super important for establishing Joel's character and many aspects about him, as there is a time skip of around 20 years after this point, and we see just how much Joel has changed. Now, this is very important because, like we said, The Last of Us, while being a zombie horror survival video game and now a show, I guess, ultimately, the story that is being told is a human story. The story of Joel as a person and his relationship with this young girl, Ellie, and Joel dealing with many of the demons and kind of personal trauma from his past through this relationship with Ellie. If there was anything that The Last of Us show had to get right, it was these opening scenes, and wow, was it absolutely amazing. Basically, almost at times, frame for frame, scene for scene, and at many times they take the dialogue straight out of the video game, something that I'm super happy that they did because, like we said, The Last of Us, Part 1 specifically, as a story, as a video game, is really freaking good, and it seems pretty silly if they were going to completely change all of the source material. Now that's not to say that there isn't some creative narrative storytelling, creative narrative changes that are going on here. There's plenty of them, and frankly, I think they're pretty good, as they almost kind of necessarily had to be done to streamline the story in a live-action fashion. It's very akin to kind of House of the Dragons. There is a broad story map plot that we have from the video game The Last of Us. Essentially, what the showrunners are doing is taking that roadmap, that video game plot points, and then using some creative kind of narrative flourishes to fill in the gaps in between, but making sure they hit the broad plot points as they go. I'm not gonna lie, I was extremely shocked at just how good and how much I enjoyed the episode 1, the pilot of The Last of Us. Now, I try not to judge a show based off its pilot. There's been plenty of shows throughout the years that have had absolutely banging pilots that have fallen off like a cliff over the next few episodes. But at the very least, I have to give HBO credit here. One of the most important things they could have gotten right is this opening scene, this intro episode. The whole setup of the beginning of the first hour of the video game The Last of Us is arguably, in my opinion, the most important point and aspect of The Last of Us, as it sets up the entirety of the story and elements that are going to come into play throughout down the line. It's supposed to be emotional, it's supposed to be hard-hitting, and man, I think they did an absolutely amazing job, and we haven't even talked at all about how on point I think a lot of the casting has been, especially for our boy Joel. I always do my best to shoot straight with you guys, and I try not to overhype or get too hyped for shows like this, especially when they release on a weekly basis. We only get one new episode every week, so it's you have to be very, very careful with how hard you hype stuff like this, because you just never know if you're going to end up eating those words if they all of a sudden release a really dud of an episode. So far, though, so good from The Last of Us, and frankly, I gotta say, I'm pretty impressed, as when I first heard that they were making a Last of Us show, I was a little worried. Excited to see that the future of The Last of Us is. Excited to see their rendition of these mushroom zombies, these clickers, as we still have yet to see one in The Last of Us. I like that they didn't show us this right away, making the audience wait, teasing it out, as that's how you really build some good hype around a show. As always, guys, I look forward to reading your thoughts in the comment section down below. Let me know what you thought of The Last of Us episode 1 on HBO. Do you think it's going to live up to hype? Were you happy? Are you a Last of Us fan? Do you think that this episode did justice for an arguably, in my opinion, one of the most important scenes and aspects of The Last of Us, which is in like the first hour? As always, I hope to see you in the next one, guys. Stay safe out there. Until next time, peace, love, adu.
A love story that might be. We wasn't supposed to happen. So much talk around us. We became numb to the yapping. It was like 05. Got my license to drive. Picked you up in my pop's car. Went for a ride. Couldn't no one tell us nothing. That night was ours. All the stars aligned and you were so